Blossoms have recently released their brand new album, Gary. In light of that, I'm going to rank every Blossoms album from their worst to their best in this video. Okay, so this is kind of the first video on this second channel. I don't usually do videos like this. I have got a main channel where I talk about Doctor Who, but I thought I kind of wanted to talk about this and kind of have somewhere to talk about other things that I don't normally talk about. So I've kind of restarted this second channel that I've had for a while now, but this is like the first proper video back, and all the other videos are no longer on the channel. They haven't been on the channel for a while now. But yeah, because Blossoms have just released their new album, Gary, I thought I'd rank all the Blossoms albums from worst to best. But before I do that, I just kind of want to give a little bit of history to kind of Blossoms and their, like, I guess, connection to me, if you can call it that. I used to be big into, like, indie music when I was a teenager, when I was kind of in, maybe towards the end of secondary school, or most of the time that I was, like, at sixth form and stuff like that. I was big into, you know, Blossoms was one of them, obviously, Catfish and the Bottlemen, Arctic Monkeys. My music taste has changed quite a lot now. Since then, I'm still big into bands like Arctic Monkeys and obviously Blossoms, but indie music is not really my kind of scene anymore, I guess. I'm more into post-punk kind of artists now, like, for example, Idols and Shame and Squid, stuff like that is more kind of my stuff now, and I'll probably do some rankings for them in the future. I think the next one I'll probably do is probably for like Arctic Monkeys or Idols or something like that, so let me know if you want to see those in the comments down below. But for this one, because I'm still big into Blossoms and I've heard all of their albums, I thought I'd rank all of their albums from worst to best, and obviously because they've just released a new album, that's obviously also a big part of it, why I've chose to do them first, even though it's not the kind of music that I listen to as much nowadays. So with all that being said, let's start the ranking from their worst album, which, you know, I like most of these albums, or pretty much all of them, so it's kind of my least favorite is probably more accurate, although this first one is quite easily my least favorite and what I would personally say is their worst album for me personally, and that one is Ribbon Around the Bomb, which is the album that was released just before Gary. I think it was a year or two before, and the reason I've put this on the bottom is, although I remember liking some of the singles, particularly Care For when they released that, and I actually saw that one live before this album came out when they were performing at Leeds Festival. I listened to this album once when it came out, and it wasn't the kind of sound that I was interested in, particularly from listening to the singles, and so I listened to it once when it first came out, and I've pretty much never listened to it again. I think I've only heard this album once, like, ever. I've maybe listened to songs like Care For and Ribbon Around the Bomb some other times since then, but the album itself I've not really gone back to listen to. Even for this video, I didn't really feel like going back to listen to it, because it's just not an album that I remember being that bothered about. I can't remember even how many of the songs go besides those singles, to be honest, so that's why this was quite an easy one for me to put at the bottom. If I had to pick a best song from this album, it would probably be Care For. Like I said, I also like Ribbon Around the Bomb, but in terms of picking worst songs, I don't really have any, because like I said, I don't really remember any other songs from this album, and I haven't listened to it again recently. Okay, at number 4 on this list, I'm picking Cool Like You, which is Blossom's second album. This is kind of where it gets to the point where it's just kind of like my least favorites rather than the worst, because I don't hate this album, it's just that the other albums above it I prefer a lot more. It has got some great songs in there with There's a Reason Why, I Can't Stand It, and I also like some songs like I Just Imagined You and Giving Up the Ghost, but the rest of the albums I can't really remember too much how I feel about them, and it's kind of similar to Ribbon Around the Bomb, but I've definitely listened to those songs more than Ribbon Around the Bomb. I just don't have much of a connection to the rest of the songs on this album personally. Okay, so in third place, before I say what it is, I think third and second place are the ones that I'm not too sure on, and they could be kind of interchangeable, but for the sake of this list I have decided to put Gary there. Obviously it's the brand new one, so maybe part of me debating whether or not to put it second is kind of recency bias, but I do personally think this is the right way, but like I said, these could be interchangeable. It is a really good sounding album. They've kind of decided to go back to the same sound they had for Foolish Love in Spaces, which is, as you'll hear later on in this video, is a sound that I really like that they kind of approached. Both of those albums kind of sound like they're somewhat inspired by the kind of road that Arctic Monkeys kind of went down for Tranquility Base and The Car, and I think Blossoms are really good at that sound. It's a very 70s kind of sound, and particularly with Gary, they did all of these songs kind of live and recorded them live, which you can really tell, and it really does make the sound of this album sound a lot better, but it's just not as good as the other two albums that I've got left to talk about on this list. I've got quite a few best songs from this album, so I can't really just pick one, but I like particularly the title track, Gary. I like What Can I Say After I'm Sorry. Big Star is a great opener to this album. I liked the other single, Perfect Me. I quite like the song Cinnamon as well, although I've not listened to that whole bunch at this point yet because the album's only been out for a week. And I also like the closing track, Why Do I Give You the Worst of Me. In terms of the worst songs on this album, I didn't really like I Like Your Look when I first listened to it when it came out the day before the album dropped, because it's just a very different sound to the rest of the album. The second or third time I listened to it as well, I still wasn't a big fan of it, but after listening to it a few more times, I don't hate it as much as I initially did. It's just a very different sound to the album, and there's not really that much Blossoms on there because it is a collaboration with CMAT. And in terms of another track I have put on my worst songs for this album, I have put Slow Down on there as well, just because it's not that memorable to me. The only thing I do remember from it is that it was kind of giving a very MGMT inspired sound, and I do like MGMT, so it was a decent sound, but it doesn't really fit into the album as much as the other songs, and it just wasn't as memorable as some of the other songs for me. Okay, so on to the second favourite album from Blossoms on this list. I've put the debut album, Blossoms, their self-titled album, because it's just a classic. It's their debut, it's what got them where they were, and there's pretty much no bad songs on this album really, and a lot of them are very classic songs. And besides that, I don't think there's too much to say about this album besides, you know, saying the best and the worst songs. So if I had to pick the best songs from this album, my favourite song is definitely Atmos to Kiss, pretty much tied with Honey Sweet as well. I really like those songs. I also like Texier, it's got a very good riff in there, and Cut Me and I'll Bleed as well is one of my favourite songs from this album. If I had to pick a worst song from this album, I'd probably pick Onto Her Bed, just because I can't think that I've listened to it a whole bunch, and I honestly don't remember too much about the song, but it might not be that bad. I might just need to give it another listen, a more recent listen. And obviously, as you've figured out by now, the top album that I've picked from this list, my favourite Blossoms album, is Foolish Love in Spaces. Like I said, I just really like that 70s sound that they went for, which, like I said, I think was kind of inspired by the road that Arctic Monkeys went down with Tranquility Base. But I think it just really suits Blossoms very well, this kind of 70s sound. And I just don't see them releasing an album, in my opinion, that's going to kind of top this, although it is still a fairly recent album for them, so they definitely could do it. And like I said, Gary was still a very similar sound to this album. It just wasn't quite the same level and didn't quite have as many good songs, in my opinion. I like every song in this album, but if I had to pick my favourite songs from this album, my favourite song is definitely Sunday Was a Friend of Mine. I also love If You Think This Is Real Life, and I like My Swimming Brain a lot as well. And if I had to pick a worst song from this album, or worst songs from this album, first of all, I don't think there really are any, but if I had to pick some, I would probably say Romance and maybe Falling for Someone. But like I said, I do really like those songs, so I don't really have any worst songs. I was also debating putting Like Gravity in there as well, because it similarly doesn't stand out as much as those two songs as well, but it's also a really great closer to the album, so I don't really want to put Like Gravity in there because I think it's a perfect way to close off the album. Okay, so that's my ranking of all the Blossoms albums. Let me know what you think about this kind of video on the second channel. Let me know if you've seen this without even knowing of my main channel, if you've just kind of come across this from like the recommended tab and stuff like that. Like I said, this is kind of just where I'm going to put stuff where I want to talk about it, but it doesn't fit on my main channel, so it's not just going to be album rankings and stuff like that. I might do some movie reviews in here and just talk about some other general things. Like I said, in terms of the album rankings, I think the next one I'll probably do is ranking all the Arctic Monkeys albums, because they're ones that I've heard every album for, honestly probably like every song from. I just love Arctic Monkeys, they're one of my favourite bands, so that's one I could easily do another album ranking for very quickly if I wanted to. So that's probably the next video that will come out on this channel. I'm not sure exactly when that will be, but that's what I'm planning on. And I also will probably do one for Idols as well in the near future as well. And if you're watching this at the time when I've already got a few more album rankings out, you know, if you're watching this in the future, I'll make sure to put a playlist of all the album rankings I've got so far in a playlist here.